Howdy, this is Jim Rutt, and this is The Jim Rutt Show. Listeners have asked us to provide pointers to some of the resources we talk about on the show. We now have links to books and articles referenced in recent podcasts that are available on our website. We also offer full transcripts. Go to jimruttshow.com. That's jimruttshow.com. This is another of our special extra episodes around coronavirus 19 and the social, political, and other economic implications of that shock to our system. Today's guest is Ben Goertzel, who's been on the show before, and he's put out some interesting tweets focusing on some of the not so good things to expect on the other side of the C-19 outbreak. And I think that's important for us to start thinking about right now, because whether the peak's going to be in late April, May, June, it's not far off. And unfortunately, what I'm seeing, even from the best state and national leaders, is very understandable. Focus on trying to flatten the curve and dealing with the shitstorm we have from the rising curve. But interestingly, managing the backside of the curve is going to be every bit as important. In fact, maybe more important to the long-term social and economic health of our country. So with that, let's jump in. So Ben, one of the things you talk about is, and we're already seeing it. My daughter, who's 31, a lot of her friends working in entry-level positions, they're all getting laid off, right? And many of them aren't going to be rehired. The economy is going to restructure itself. What are some of your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of changes in the economy and structure of society that have been sort of poised and waiting to happen, but held back by a sort of inertia. And then the disruption of COVID-19, it triggers some changes that were sort of in the structure of society. And, it's hard to focus one's attention on these medium-term economic and social issues when you're worried about, am I going to die next week? Or is my grandma going to die tomorrow, right? But on the other hand, we're going to get through the COVID-19 pandemic. I mean, it's bad, and people will die who I would much rather didn't die. But we're going to get through it. We're going to create vaccines. We're going to find antiviral cocktails. And at the end of it, society is going to be a little bit different than before in ways that are going to be significant for many people, and in many ways not good for a lot of people, right? So that, and you can see this in a bunch of different ways, right? So I mean, one of them, as you say, Jim, is a lot of service employees are being laid off now, and there's an obvious pattern to who's going to get laid off and who isn't, right? So I mean, if you're a knowledge employee, or if that term still is used, I mean, if you're white collar and you're working at your laptop all day, right, or at your desk, writing documents and munching spreadsheets, pretty much you can still do that at home. You can convert your meetings to Zoom calls. There's a bit of loss of efficiency due to the toddler flinging muck at your head while you work at home, but you're still operational. But if you're flipping burgers at McDonald's, or greeting people at the department store, or carrying out various jobs that are just face-to-face human interaction, I mean, then there's really no reason for your employer to keep you employed during this sort of flash depression we're seeing due to COVID. And indeed, your employer probably can't afford to. But then once the COVID flash depression is over, then what happens? In some cases, you'll just get hired back. But in other cases, your employer will take a fresh look at the situation and think like, well, maybe we can do more online ongoingly, even after COVID is gone. Or maybe now is the time to invest in some automation technology, or to outsource this or that. So I think not all the service employees laid off are going to be rehired. And then, at the same time, smart investors, funds with piles of money, they're going to be looking around now and saying, well, like, hey, what can I buy up at a discount price during this depression? Because the owners don't have the money to sustain for 6 months without revenue, or what competitors can I put out of business because they can't survive on their cash stockpile, but I can. So you're going to see major consolidation in a variety of industries. So in short, increasing wealth in the hands of the wealthy and more unemployed people becoming poorer and poorer, at the same time as more power is going to the hands of big tech companies and big government, right? Because the techlash is fading. Now, everyone loves Amazon and everyone loves Google and Zoom and whatever tools give them their lifeline and connection. Facebook give their lifeline and connection to the outside world while they're stuck at home dealing with their suddenly much more annoying family members, right? So I mean, techlash is gone. Big banks and PE funds are owning more and more. Working class people put out of work, and then government will slowly put in better and better surveillance mechanisms, sucking data from big tech so as to better monitor the pandemic. But then whatever monitoring they put in place for the pandemic is going to keep going, right? So we're looking toward more and more of a sort of a fascist oligopoly and oligarchy, which is kind of what we already have, but we're nudging further and further in that direction once this pandemic is gone. At least, none of us knows what the hell is going to happen, but that seems like sort of the most likely course, unless something even worse happens, or unless some of us crazy hackers and freaks manage to get some alternative systems rolling.
Yep, I think those are all spot on analyses. I use a framing for what comes after, and I say that we'll see a mix of homeostasis and hysteresis. Homeostasis being a biological, mostly biological, I think it has a chemical origin, for systems that tend to converge back to the way they were. Hysteresis being a physics term for systems that basically are influenced by recent events and move off into new directions and don't return. An example I like to give is business travel. It's my firm prediction, I've made some adjustments in my portfolio to represent this, that business travel will never return. As you were saying, things that could have happened but hadn't happened because of inertia. There was sort of this game theoretic, I have to show you respect by flying to Hong Kong for a 1-hour meeting. Waste of time and money at prodigious portions.
I think you're wrong on that one, but we could place a bet on it, because I think for psychological reasons you're wrong. I think a lot of people are going to get sick of hanging out with their husband and kids, or wife and kids, and they will be very eager to resume business travel just for personal reasons. So
I think you'll want to go back. I'll bet you. Let's do it. Let's phrase a bet, and I'll bet you any reasonable stake, because I do believe people do need to get back to work. For most people, working from home is not sustainable. But flying halfway across the world for a 1-hour business meeting, absurd. When you could do 3 1-hour Zooms and get much more work done.
Well, I think as often, it will probably be a bit of each, right?
Yeah, that's why I say it's a mix of hysteresis and homeostasis.
No, but I mean, regarding business travel in particular, which may not be the best thing for us to dig into in great depth. But I mean, I think you're right that, like, if VCs get used to closing investment deals via conference call, then they're going to know, like, yeah, I can close investment deals via a conference call. So we don't always need to wait in order for someone to meet face to face in order to do it, right? So I think that could be a genuine acceleration and efficiency improvement. Because I mean, now you have VCs in Silicon Valley vying to close a deal with some hot startup in New York or Atlanta or somewhere, but they still wait to close until people can fly around and meet face to face, right? So if they get in their head that they don't need to do that, then the competition will happen in a bunch of video calls, and things will happen even faster. So I think there definitely will be cases like that. On the other hand, as someone who speaks at a bunch of events, I can see that the sort of connections you make at conferences and events isn't happening now. I mean, what the kind of networking one can do now is great for those of us who are old and well networked and already know a lot of people. But in the current scheme of things, in this COVID period, there's no way for new people just entering an industry or an area of research to build their social network. Like online conferences really don't cut it. Second Life doesn't cut it. So if the COVID clears up significantly in the summer, there's a shitstorm of events that are postponed till September and October. So, I mean, one test will be, how much of these events that were supposed to be in spring postponed till September and October, like how much are they flooded with people? And I think assuming COVID clears up in the summer, they'll be astoundingly flooded with people.
I think that's a good distinction between conferences and just routine business travel, of which there's so goddamn much. I think so. It won't be binary. But let's move on to the bigger questions. The point that you make, I think, is the overriding one, is that unfortunately, without some interventions or revolt of the masses, this is a step function event of the big getting bigger and the rich getting richer. For instance, my wife and I have talked about, we should sign up for the Kroger, order online, pick it up grocery thing. But we never did. And we continued to, hit various small specialty stores, the local hippie co-op, etc. Well, guess what? In the age of the plague, we quickly mastered, all three of the major grocery chain order in advance and, have it delivered into the back of your car services. And I can tell you, we're going to continue to use those things. And the percentage of our wallet share that goes to the hippie co-op and to the little funky small grocery store is going to go down. And we'll try to resist that because.
Well, yeah. I mean, so here now I'm on Vashon Island near Seattle right now. And, an awful lot of live music clubs in Seattle where I know the musicians who play there are the proprietors. I mean, they're shutting down now because there's no gigs and no audiences. But most of these guys aren't going to start new live music clubs because it was pretty marginal in the first place, right? So you could see a whole new crop of little live music venues pop up, but I'm kind of doubting it actually. So that I think there's a lot of things that were waiting to happen and kept back by inertia, and they're given a nudge here. So
there's an example where things may reconfigure. I happen to know some people in the kind of grassroots music business, and they've been telling me for years that the business has been moving from the clubs to what are called home concerts, where a musician and a homeowner who's a fan will get together and offer a concert and charge $10 or $20, and 3/4 of it or 90% of it will go to the musician, and 10% will go to the homeowner to cover the cost of chips and water. And the musician will make a lot more money than they were making in the clubs, and the homeowner had this very cool experience of one of their favorite niche musicians actually doing a concert in their home. So maybe we'll see a reconfiguration more strongly to those home concerts.
I mean, there's a lot of ways things could happen, and you can play outdoors in a public park where the climate is warm. You can play in a restaurant, right? But I guess the common trend will be this shift will be toward things that are lower costs to operate and involve less, working class human labor, and that's going to be, I would say, a common denominator among these things. And then shifting to home concerts is sort of then, again, it's a shift toward the gig economy, right? Like the guy whose house it is temporarily playing the role that would be played by the club owner, but probably making less money than the club owner does, right?
On the other hand, has no cost, right? Has no variable cost. He has the house.
Yeah.
So it actually may end up being more profitable, but it just reconfigures how assets are used. And this shock will cause a lot of that. And, I'm suggesting to people who really want to think about the backside of the curve, which is coming very rapidly. I have to keep reminding people of that. This peak will be, late April, May, June, maybe. And managing the backside of the curve is going to be a much bigger and more important task for our society than trying to flatten the curve is, because we're very much ad hoc. Go ahead.
So the case of music concerts is one where it may all be fine anyway. Like we've already gotten rid of tower records and so on. You can distribute your music through the internet, and you can play locally in somebody's backyard. Now the case of retail supply chains and of retail being reduced to only like Walmart, Amazon, and Target or something. I mean, this comes down to a corporate hegemony thing, where then if you're selling a product the 90s outlets want to sell, there's no way to get it to anyone, right? And so I mean, in a lot of domains, you're seeing things narrow focus to just a few outlets. So it almost becomes like a variant of the dreaded old communist system, where you just have to buy everything online from the government's retail outlet or something. And these big tech companies that are monopolizing things, large retailers, they are in fact closely tied with the government, for better or worse, right? Like, I mean, Amazon and Microsoft putting huge new server farms right and bodies of staff right next to the Pentagon. So I mean, we're moving through the combination of social factors like this COVID pandemic, and then just economies of scale in technology. I mean, we're moving toward an oligopoly that is hard to break without busting out of the traditional ways of doing things, right? And that's something that's been frustrating to me as someone who's been, participating in the blockchain and crypto ecosystem through SingularityNet, which is the AI-based, blockchain-based AI marketplace I've been working on for the last couple of years. I mean, crypto and blockchain were sort of supposed to be forming alternatives to all these centralized hegemonic methods, right? Like when there was a global financial crisis, it's supposed to be Bitcoin that comes out as the new gold or the new global reserve currency or something. And then instead of Amazon, we're supposed to have some decentralized token-based system for, small sellers to sell things to customers with a smart decentralized reputation system. And then, as it is happening, when the world is in a situation where this sort of thing would really, really be useful, it's not ready for prime time, right? I mean, the US dollar is supreme again with a flight to quality, like always in a financial crunch. And then, decentralized marketplaces are either very specialized or just too crude to do anything. And if you need to order a bunch of stuff, you got to go to Amazon, right? So the question is, like, by the next big crisis, be it a pandemic or like a global rash of cyber attacks bringing down the power grid or whatever the big next crisis is, and there probably will be one, right? Then will alternative mechanisms be there yet to even be part of the story? Because now in the current crisis, they're not really part of the story.
Yep. Unfortunately, that is true. Again, I've been working on this thing with some friends called Game B, which is a still fairly sketchy, vague, I should say, new social operating system, operating with much more localism, much more ability to sever the networks without bad things happening, et cetera. But we're, still years away from being ready to be an alternative social operating system. Though I am taking this as a wake-up call rather than saying we have, 30 or 40 years to figure it out. I'm at least taking it as a personal mission to say we got to figure this thing out before the next one. So I think your point is well taken. None of the alternatives.
So that's the question, right? How many people will take this as a wake-up call in various ways? And that's not entirely clear, right? I mean, like of course, what happened to Dostoevsky, the Russian writer. Like, he was put in front of the firing squad, gun is held to his head. Then, they fire, and it turns out to be blanks. And after coming that close to death, after that, he's like, wow, every minute I breathe is amazing. Life is wonderful. I will cherish each moment. And that lasted like 6 months or something for him. Then he went back to grumbling about how annoying life is like always, right? So, I mean, that's the homeostasis, right? So the question is, how many people who are getting a wake-up call now will get a go-to-sleep call 6 months later when things seem to be back to normal? Because that's what happens after every financial bubble and financial crash, right? After another 6 months or a year, people start thinking again that another crash can never happen again.
Yeah. Here's my view on this. I've been thinking about this hard, which is I do not believe this is the revolutionary time for the reasons you articulated, that the infrastructure just isn't there yet. However, a lot of people are being woken up. I'm talking to a bunch of them. And so I believe this epoch, post the backside of the curve in the next 6 months, that's a good time. This is the time to build the cadre. We may be able to build the cadre by a factor of 10 or 20, people whose ears have been opened by this big, force applied to them. They've been forced to think about life and death for the first time ever in their life for a lot of middle-class Americans. And so many more ears will be open. So I personally, and people I know, are going to be putting forth a blitz to try to grow our cadre, which we might call our Game B space 10,000 people. Let's see if we can grow it to 250,000 by the end of the year. And then from that basis, there'll be enough skill sets and there'll be enough leaders that perhaps we can build a faster route to spin up so that when the next crisis comes, and it is coming, whether it's climate related, a food pandemic. Which
you might be right. I mean, I think people have been woken up to some extent to the fact that things aren't quite as stable, predictable, and necessary as they had thought, right? Like to some of us, that's always been obvious that the status quo is kind of fragile and you could have a massive disruption at any time. But most people don't think that way. And their minds are blown that, oh, what the fuck, I can't go eat at a restaurant now. What the hell is going on? Like, airfare from Seattle to Boston is $10 each way. How can this be? So to people who really weren't thinking that things could be so radically disrupted, I mean, now they've got that in their head, and that does give an opening. And this is part of our thinking with this COVID-19 decentralized AI hackathon, the COVID-athon that we've organized with Singularity Net, together with Ocean Protocol and Decentralized AI Alliance, right? Like the proximal goal, which is a real one, is like, let's get hackers on AI and blockchain who are finding themselves perhaps with an unusual amount of free time now, let's get them working, creating code that can be useful to help with the COVID-19 situation. I mean, maybe some code that allows decentralized mechanisms to serve some useful functions now. On the other hand, we're also looking at this as an opportunity to aggregate together a whole bunch of hackers with an enthusiasm that hasn't been there before for using AI to combat like global social issues, right? And so maybe in the optimal case, do something useful for COVID-19, and then we keep growing the group afterwards, and you have a more integrated network of decentralized AI hackers, building the infrastructure that will let us deal better with the next crisis when it comes. Because of course the next crisis is going to come. Like, look at the whole world infrastructure. I mean, the major nations of the world are run by what kinds of people, right? I mean, how stable is the banking system? I mean, it's every major system that regulates life on the planet has some extreme corruption or degeneration in it, right? And it's amazing that things even operate as well as they do on an everyday basis. But they're certainly not robust enough to keep going to the technological singularity without a series of further crises, probably some much worse than the COVID-19 crisis.
Exactly. I've been calling this the mini apocalypse, right? Unlikely that the basic infrastructure goes down, electricity and water, things like that. I would not make that next same guarantee about the next one. You have to go, and so do I. So let's spend the next 5 minutes on a little bit of a counter trend to what we've been talking about. One of my takeaways when I think about our Game B movement in particular is, I'll confess, it has sort of a hippy-dippy flavor, decentralized, building proto-bees that communicate with each other through, protocols that we all agree upon in advance, an emergent justice system, etc. All sounds like a great way to live, but unfortunately doesn't necessarily sound like a great way to be able to respond in real time decisively against a crisis. So I think a challenge to all of us who are thinking about decentralized social operating systems, we need now to use this event, and I would also postulate a more severe version, and essentially say that our decentralized social operating system needs to be able to have the near real-time command and control capabilities to
Jim,
deal with a strong system like this.
I think the current U.S. response to COVID-19 illustrates very well the weakness of centralized control systems, right? Because, I mean, you have a buffoon in chief in charge of the U.S. who is the centerpiece of the centralized control system. And because that one component is cognitively and emotionally faulty, I mean, then the response of the whole U.S. system was slower than it should have been. And China's response demonstrated the same thing, right? I mean, at the top, they had a system for suppressing freedom of press and freedom of information, and the top level of the centralized control system caused the initial response to be too slow, even though the response of China a little afterwards became highly efficient in many ways. So yeah, I think it's clear that a well-crafted decentralized response system can be much, much better than the centralized systems we have now, for the exact reason that the centralized system is too susceptible to failing due to weaknesses at the center, which is exactly what we've seen. But you need a effective, well-designed, decentralized system, not just well-designed, but fully implemented and tested. And unfortunately, we don't have that yet. Not because it's not possible technologically or conceptually, just because insanely much more resources have gone into creating and maintaining the centralized systems, because the resources are controlled by the people in power of the centralized system.
Exactly. And how do we get the decentralized? I agree with you, absolutely agree with you that this is a demonstration of the failure of Game A and its over-reliance on a single faulty part. And of course, it's not just in the U.S. Most of the West has also failed. Italy and Spain, looks like England and France are also going to suffer hard. Sweden's not doing well. So it's not just our own faulty part.
Sure.
There's,
You're right. I mean, Trump is just an especially colorful example, but it's a systemic phenomenon.
And I do agree that decentralized systems ought to do better, but we have to start thinking about them in terms of dealing with problems of this magnitude, not just in a hippy-dippy way of how we live our life in a better way. And I think that's one of my big takeaways and one of my communications obligations going forward, is to make sure that when we're thinking about these protocols, and I know you guys have been doing that with your Singularity Net, how do we deal with the biggest problems? Aliens invade the Earth, or a truly.
No, I mean, yeah, you're right. I mean, we want to appeal to all the reptile emotions. So we want to appeal to lust, but also to fear, right? So I mean, I think, and people sort of they need to understand all the dimensions of the situation in order to respond appropriately, and understanding not only how wonderful an anarchist utopia we can create with decentralized tools and methods, but also how scary the world can be if we don't have those decentralized methods to protect us from a bunch of shit. I mean, all these aspects are important to appealing to human motivational systems, right? Which is what needs to be done if we're going to leverage human energy, because toward building an alternative to the centralized systems that control the world now. Because it's very possible to create decentralized networks that work much, much more efficiently than the centralized systems controlling the world now. But it is hard, right? I mean, it's really even something as simple as a decentralized, efficient payment system, which the crypto world has been working on for a long time. I mean, it's clear that's possible, but there's just a lot of algorithm and implementation work to be done there. And to make a whole decentralized operating system for the world, there's a whole lot of pieces like that all have to work together. We absolutely have the technology and the brain power on the planet to do it, but people need to be energized and motivated in that direction. So yeah, if this pandemic serves to wake up enough people with relevant skills and resources to the need for building an alternative decentralized infrastructure, I mean, then the pandemic in hindsight will appear like an extremely positive thing for the evolution of humanity.
Let's end it right there. We both got to go. Thank you, Ben, for a very interesting perspective as always.
Yeah. Thanks for the good questions. And looking forward to the next time.
Very good. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Production services and audio editing by Jared Janes Consulting. Music by Tom Muller at modernspacemusic.com.